All right, good evening and welcome everybody. Welcome to this month's Connecting Families, which is sponsored by the Federation for Children with Special Needs. We're really excited this evening to bring to you an introduction to genetics for parents and school personnel. Before we get started, I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping items. One is that in a few minutes, there will be a link to Wordly so that we could actually, if you are in need of interpretation services during this discussion, you'll be able to click on that link and select your language of choice. And also, there is a lot of information that we're going to be sharing. It's going to take up a good portion of this evening's hour. So we will answer as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A so that we can see if there are common themes that we might be able to tackle this evening. And if not, as always, we will take all of your questions, make sure we get responses to them, and include them when we upload the video to the Federation's website. So again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And let me introduce to you our two speakers. The first one we have here is Edward Kloza. Ed is a certified genetic counselor and currently serves as genetics consultant for the New England Regional Genetics Network, or NERGN, which is housed in the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire. Ed is a long and varied career, both as a clinician and an educator, working to bring context and understanding to students at all levels. Ed lives and works in Maine. So we welcome you tonight, Ed. Thank you so much for being here with us. And also with him is Karen Volle, who is the program manager of NERGN. She lives in New Hampshire as well. She has been in this or a similar role since 2008. She has a strong background in human services, having directed a juvenile intake program for 18 years prior to working at UNH. This experience spanned child welfare, the juvenile court system, and social services, and helped Karen learn to look across systems as well as to manage day-to-day activities. She now uses those skills at the Institute on Disability. So please join me in welcoming Karen. We're really excited about this evening's topic, and we're really excited about the possibilities and are looking forward to ways that you can learn how you and your families can possibly engage more effectively with professionals in the genetic field. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to our esteemed presenters this evening.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Renee, and it's a pleasure to be here at the Foundation, the Federation, Mass Federation, which I've been involved with for a few years, giving presentations in a variety of languages. And as I understand it now, it's kind of choose your own language to hear me, which is like technology is amazing. But Karen and I have done presentations like this for quite some time, and we are interested in helping school personnel, the school system, the educational system, interact more efficiently with the genetic specialists, because very often it's the school personnel and the school staff that are least likely to get information about possible genetic conditions. And it's very important for them, if they have responsibility for trying to educate children who have special needs like this, to be as familiar as they can be with the possible genetic causes of a diagnosis. Well, Karen, if you can go to the next slide, just kind of review the objectives. The first is to help understand how genetic changes or changes in someone's genetic material can impact a child's health and development. We also want to explore how your understanding of genetics may support your professional relationship with the child and their family. So this speaks directly to family engagement. We want to make sure that families and the people in the school system who are teaching their kids kind of all on the same page with regard to how genetics may fit into their child's condition. Thirdly, to help people in the school system identify and respond to signs that might suggest to them that a condition that they see in a child under their care or in their care might be genetic in nature, and to kind of look at what all of the implications of that may be. And finally, and Karen will talk about this in some detail, there are resources out there. NERGN has developed a lot of them and is happy to share them with you to help the family and to help clinicians and to help school personnel understand genetics and optimize management. These are resources that are specifically designed to help kids as they make their way through the school journey. It's one of 7 regional genetics networks funded by the federal government. And the goal is to help improve access to genetic services, especially among medically underserved populations. And as Beth mentioned, NERGN is housed at the University of New Hampshire in Durham. Karen Volle is the program manager and the co-PI, and Dr. Angela Shepard is the program director. So why do we bother dealing with understanding genetics? Because it might help identify the cause of a child's condition. If a child's condition is genetic, then next slide, it might, we may have a better chance at knowing what the prognosis is, what the best testing would be, the best treatment, the best management, and to share those resources with folks. And by knowing what to expect and why, we'll have more of an opportunity to more efficiently and effectively manage that child's condition and optimize the opportunities that that child may have. The more knowledge you have, the more power you have in taking control over the child's future. So if you all remember back in probably your sophomore year of high school, you had biology and probably had exposure to genetics. Certainly when you were in high school, you had a lot more genetics than I did back in the day, because so much more is known about genetics than it was when I went to high school back in the Paleolithic era. What I want to talk about is how a structure of molecules, very simple molecules, can be strung together and help become the blueprint for the creation and the maintenance of a human being. From conception until death, your genes play a large part in how your health will be, how you will develop, how you will grow. I like to think of our genetic material as instructions for making a human being and kind of a recipe book. And the analogy that I like to use is having 23 volumes of a recipe book. You get 23 volumes from your mother, you inherit 23 volumes from your father. And these are very similar. Each volume is pretty much the same. There are some differences, but they are designed to give instructions for the same material. Not only do the genetic material that make us alike and make us different, but the same genetic material is in bacteria and giraffes and fish and every other living thing. So it's a kind of a universal code that, depending upon how you put it together, you can get a human being, or you can get an elephant, or you can get a daisy. Next slide, please. If you were to take one of these chromosomes, if you look at the chromosomes in this picture, First of all, I got to tell you that your chromosomes rarely look like this. They don't, number one, they're never colored as beautifully as these are. This was done in a laboratory. And these are all shrunken together and condensed. But if you were to take a pair of scissors and take the time to cut each one of these chromosomes out and paste them onto a piece of paper, you can easily see that they are arrangeable in pairs. There are large ones, there are small ones. And depending upon their size, their shape, you can see which pairs go together. And remember, one of each of these came from your mom, one of each of these came from your dad. And you pass on one of these to each of your children, one of each pair. And your child inherits the other one from the other parent. If you were to take a chromosome, and imagine this is a chromosome, this is a skein of yarn, clearly, but a skein of yarn has two ends. It's one long thread, and it's got a beginning, and it has an end. And that's the same thing with your DNA and a chromosome. If you were to grab one of those chromosomes, find each end, stretch it out, you'd have one long chain of DNA. You've all heard of DNA. It's in about every other TV show. It's in popular music these days and commercials. It's pretty popular, and it's made up of only four letters: A, T, G, and C. So for as complex an organism as we are as human beings, there are only four letters that go into writing the instruction book. Kind of amazing. The next slide explains how differences can occur among us. It's because each human cell has about 3 billion of these pairs of letters. So there is a tremendous amount of DNA that can be misread or miswritten. If you were to take all the DNA from one cell, skin cell, stretch it out like a yarn and hook each end together, you'd have a string of DNA about 6 feet long. And if you took the DNA from all of the cells in your body and stretched it out together, you'd have a string of DNA that would stretch from the earth to the sun and back many times. The point is that there is so much DNA in each of us that even small changes, even the change in one letter of this one of these volumes can mean the difference between life and death. And every cell contains the complete set of information to make a human. A brain cell has all the information it needs to make a kidney cell or a liver cell. But brain cells typically just make brain cells. How that works, still being worked on. If you change a single letter in the instructions, it can have a devastating impact on health. We're going to talk about how that can occur. Sometimes you can change a letter or many letters, and they have a kind of an insignificant effect. You might get a little inkling this is something different, but it really doesn't harm anyone. Sometimes a change in a letter can actually give you an advantage. It might make you more resistant, might make you heal quicker. It might make you get pregnant easier and maintain pregnancies to term. Or many times these changes that can occur have no impact at all. They're just changes. Well, how do genetic changes happen? So let's take a look at the big picture. And this is a picture of chromosomes. It's a little different than the one I just showed you. They're colored a little differently, but you can still see that they're arranged in pairs. Sometimes, next slide, please, Karen. An entire chromosome may be added to the mix, or it might be missing, or it might be switched upside down. It might be connected to each other. And in this case, if you look down at chromosome pair number 21, There isn't a pair. There are three of them. And the extra chromosome is normal. It came from mom or dad. Nothing wrong with it. But when the time comes for that recipe book to open up and read the instructions that are on chromosome 21, instead of reading 2 sets of instructions, it reads 3. And this extra material that is made is what's responsible for what we know as Down syndrome or trisomy 21. The typical appearance, the developmental delays, all of the characteristics that we associate with Down syndrome are because of extra material in chromosome 21. Sometimes chromosomes are missing. Sometimes they're switched around. Sometimes, and in this case, there's an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. Sometimes one of those chromosomes is missing. But these are changes that you can actually see with a microscope. But there are other changes that can happen that can't be seen because they're smaller. They don't involve whole big pieces of chromosomes. The next slide gives an example of that. This is a girl who has just a small piece of chromosome 22 missing. Chromosome 22 is one of the smallest ones. Yeah, but with this syndrome, there are 30 or 40 genes missing from chromosome 22, and those are responsible for the maladies, the learning difficulties, the autism spectrum disorder that often accompanies this. The interesting thing is that this girl probably did not inherit this from either parent. It just happened spontaneously with her. She didn't inherit it, but because she has it, she can pass it on to her children. So this is an example of how just a few genes missing from a very small chromosome can have an impact on health and development. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do these genetic changes happen? Well, anytime you copy something, and DNA is copied all the time because cells have to be made all the time. As we're talking here this evening, cells in your body are dying. New cells have to be made to replace them. In children, you have to really increase the number of cells because that's what you call growth. As these kids grow, as everyone grows, more cells have to be produced. And when cells are produced, the DNA has to be copied over. And whenever you copy DNA, you invite the opportunity for a change to occur. Now, sometimes changes occur because of something in the environment. For example, if you lay in the sun and the equator long enough, there's a good chance you'll get some type of a change in the skin DNA that makes skin, and you can have a melanoma or some type of a skin cancer. Carcinogens in the lung can cause lung cancer. So sometimes it's something in the environment, but most often these changes just happen naturally, and they're more likely to happen as we get older, because as we get older, we have to make more cells, and the mechanisms for copying DNA don't work quite as well. There are like spell checkers in our body, in our DNA, that when new DNA is made, there is a molecular spell checker that will find errors and replace them with correct letters. That system, that spell checker, doesn't work as well when we're older as it does when we're younger. So the older you get, the more likely you are to experience changes in your DNA. Sometimes the changes only affect certain cells in a person, like skin cancer. Sometimes if they are brought into the cells that make eggs in females or sperm in males, those changes can be passed on from parent to child. Sometimes the changes that I mentioned can be good. Sometimes they doesn't matter, and sometimes they can be harmful. And these harmful ones are the ones that we're most concerned about, because when kids come to your attention because of genetic changes that put them at a disadvantage, that that create learning difficulties, that create behavioral difficulties, attention difficulties, then that's where the school system has to kind of mobilize and say, how can we understand what's going on with this child? How can we help this child to achieve the best outcome possible? So here's an example, and I'm going to go back to the analogy of a recipe book. So suppose you're reading a recipe book, and the recipe from the mother, one instruction says use 1 egg. The recipe from the father says use 1 egg. Well, that's fine. You say, all right, I know what the mother's instruction is, use 1 egg. Father's instruction, use 1 egg. I'll put 2 eggs in. That's what's supposed to be there. But if in the father's instruction there's a typo, and instead of use 1 egg, it says use 2 egg. If you were reading this instruction in a recipe book, you might say, well, you know what? I know what they're trying to tell me here. They're telling me to use 2 eggs over from the father's instruction side. So I'll put 1 in from mom, put 2 in from dad. I'll have 3 eggs. Now, 3 eggs might be perfectly fine. It might make the recipe better, tastier. And you're always going to use 3 eggs from then on in. But it might be too eggy. It might just not have the right consistency. You may not like it. Or somebody eating whatever it is with 2 eggs or 3 eggs can't tell the difference. It depends on what it is that you're making and what the impact is of that extra egg. Now, the next example is mother's instruction is correct, but the father's instruction, a W, a letter was inserted in front of the use. And I might as well just tell you that I mentioned that the alphabet in DNA only uses 4 letters. And those 4 letters make words that are only 3 letters long. So we are made using an instruction book that has words with only 3 letters. It's kind of amazing. But if one of those letters is where it shouldn't be, like in this example, that instruction from the father is nonsense. It's gibberish. So you look at this and say, okay, I'm going to use 1 egg because that's what it says from the mother. I have no clue what I'm supposed to do according to the father. I'm going to put 1 egg in. Again, might be okay, might be better, might be worse, might be undetectable. The big problem comes in if both the mother and the father have an instruction that prevents you from putting any eggs in, because you get to this point and you say, I have no idea what they want me to do. I'm not going to put any eggs in because there's nothing there about eggs, and I might just throw the recipe away. If this is a recipe for making insulin, and your body makes a insulin that is inactive or defective, then you run into a problem. If it doesn't make any insulin at all, you've got a problem. And this, you can apply this to any one of thousands of biochemicals that your body needs to make every second. If it's not making the full dosage, if it's not making the right amount, it could be devastating. So next slide, please. Now, if you remember from just the slide before, sometimes if you inherit a changed gene from only one parent, it might be okay. For example, about 1 in 25 of us carry a gene for cystic fibrosis. Most of us don't know whether we do or not, unless you've got a family history of it, of cystic fibrosis, or you happen to be tested for it. But most people don't know that they carry it, and it doesn't affect their health at all. Sometimes inheriting a changed gene from only one parent can have a significant effect. There's a disorder called Marfan syndrome, which if someone has it and only has one gene for it, they will have the expression of Marfan syndrome. And there's a 1 in 2 chance for each child that they'll inherit it. Now, Marfan syndrome is characterized by tall height, someone being lanky, very long fingers, long toes. They may have kind of a little indent in the chest. A lot of basketball players are thought to have Marfan syndrome. It gives them height, it gives them great dexterity, the ball handling skills. They can grab that ball with one hand. But they also have a weak aorta, which is the main blood vessel coming out of the heart. And this can rupture, it can break, and people can bleed to death with it. If you know you have it, and it's just one gene that someone inherited, if you know you have it, surgery can be done to kind of shore up and protect the aorta so that it isn't weak anymore. It's strong enough to survive all kinds of activity. A lot of people think that Abraham Lincoln had Marfan syndrome because of his height, but that's an example of just inheriting one gene. It has a very significant impact on health. Next slide, please, Karen. I don't want you to think that all genetic conditions are only caused by changes in one or two genes or one or two copies of a single gene, because most genetic traits and conditions are connected with many, many genes, which are very hard to figure out and impacted by different things in the environment. So, for example, if you look at height, something like height, there's a jockey and a basketball player there. And these are both grown adult men. Why is their heights different? Well, there have to be several genes that come into play. And in addition, there has to be environmental effects. What was it like when these were in the womb? These babies were in the womb. What was it like when they were newborns, their nutrition-wise, their environment? What was their environment like growing up? You cannot find one gene that will tell you whether you'll be tall or short, smart or not. There's most of life, most of the characteristics that we look at when we look at people are a combination of many, many genes and environmental factors. And an example that I think will mean something to you all is, next one, autism spectrum disorder. Very common, 1 in 36 children gets diagnosed with this. There is no specific cause of this, but we know that there are autism risk genes, probably at least 100. There are environmental factors that affect early brain development. And it's very difficult to look at a combination of genes and say, if you have these 8 and those 13, and were exposed to a hot tub while your mother was carrying you, then you're likely to have autism. None of that information is available because it's just so complex. Many genetic disorders have autism as a symptom. And if you do a test and find the genetic disorder, you might be able to say, yes, this child has XYZ syndrome and autism is part of it. But you can't kind of do it the reverse way to say, I want to see if a child has autism. There is no test that can pick out autism directly, although there are many, many folks researching it and coming up with testing panels that can bring us closer to that truth. So the genetic changes that you see in kids that are in your care might cause a mild variation that's barely noticeable, doesn't cause any significant health consequences. It maybe not even be discovered until adulthood, but they may have had it all their lives. It might cause a metabolic disruption. That is a biochemical thing in which chemicals that are required to change one thing to another or to digest food, they're not there in the right quantity. They're not there in the right form because of changes in those letters. If you can discover those, very often you can manage those with special diet or medications. Sometimes these genetic changes result in developmental delays, behavioral issues, and they wind up in schools, and early intervention is required, and special education is required. And sometimes these changes can result in physical problems which impact mobility, vision, hearing, digestion, etc. So genetic changes can be anywhere from from unnoticeable to mild to very profound. But when do you find these changes? You can find many before birth. There are tests like ultrasound or amniocentesis or screening tests. Many women choose to have these tests. Many women choose not to. Some genetic changes are found at birth, and this is where many of them are found, sometimes through newborn screening. Every child in the state of Massachusetts, every child in this country, every newborn has to have newborn screening. There are exceptions, but typically they are expected to have a newborn screening, which is just a blood test. Take a little bit of blood from the heel of the baby and test it for anywhere from 30 to 60 to more than 100 genetic disorders. And newborn screening is very interesting because if you're going to find a problem, you find it before there are any symptoms, before these kids start to display problems. If you find it early, you can stop these problems before they happen. So newborn screening, as I said, is mandated in every state. Go ahead, Karen. It benefits, it detects serious disorders before they cause significant damage. You can pull all of your resources together, your specialists. You can get treatment instituted quickly if it's necessary. You can prevent the devastating conditions that used to occur to kids who had problems that are now being picked up and screening. Parents and their caregivers can figure out what the challenges are going to be, line up their resources, line up their specialists, etc. So newborn screening has changed public health significantly since it started in the 60s. You get early intervention involved, pull together your school resources. Occupational therapy, school resources, etc. And let me just, and we're a big fan of family-led organizations, what they used to call support groups. But we believe that family-to-family type groups, mass federation, where you have folks who have been in the trenches, they have kids with these problems, they deal with them every day. You get a new family that comes in who has just been told about a diagnosis. They're totally they're at sea. They have no idea what to expect. Yes, the clinicians, the geneticists, all the medical specialists will be lined up, but what they may need is just someone to be able to say, I know what you're going through. Let me tell you what we've done. Let me tell you what works for us. Very, very strong advocates of family-led organizations. And let me just tell you, I always like to tell this story, that the newborn screening initially was used in the 60s to pick up a disorder called PKU, or phenylketonuria. And it changed the lives of kids who had it, because initially, when it wasn't picked up, these kids would have irreparable brain damage and wind up in institutions. They could not change that prognosis. When they started doing screening, they just took these kids off of milk, breast milk, most foods, because it's just an amino acid, an important part of protein found in everything we eat, was killing these kids. And if you can control the amount that they're getting, if you manage it very, very carefully, these kids do fine. And I always like to say that I bet somebody out there is drinking a Diet Pepsi or Diet Coke or something that's artificially sweetened. And if you take the time to look at the back where the nutritional information is, there's a little message there that says phenylketonurics contains phenylalanine. This is a message that you find on every artificially sweetened beverage container that is directed strictly toward people who have this genetic disorder, reminding them that even if you are drinking a diet beverage because you think there's no sugar in it, that's fine. But don't be fooled. There may be phenylalanine in it. And if you're trying to manage how much you're taking in, you got to be aware of it and count for it. So, you've been picking up these cans and bottles all your life and didn't know that there was a special message for people with genetic disorders on there. Okay, so all right, so genetic changes are found in newborn screening, but sometimes, and all kids have this, and kids will have newborn screening when the physician looks at them at birth, the pediatrician, and says, "This kid looks great. Let's do the newborn screening." If the examining physician says, there's something unusual about this child, about this newborn, the eyes are too wide, the ears are too low set or turned a different way, there's funny things going on with the fingers, funny things going on with the legs or the chest or whatever, I think there may be a genetic problem here. The physician may order diagnostic testing to try and figure out if, in fact, there is a problem that can be attributable to genetics. Now, that means that the physician is already seeing symptoms and signs. Newborn screening finds kids who have no symptoms and signs and who would be likely to be missed. If you find them at a clinical exam, it's because you see something that's very odd and unusual. Okay, so I think we can kind of roll through these, Karen, because these are picked up after. But again, you can get your resources pulled together. And sometimes genetic changes are found in childhood because these kids are missing the milestones. They're not sitting up when they should be. They're not smiling. They're not talking. They're not walking, etc. And sometimes genetic changes aren't found until you're an adult. You might have a mammogram, they find breast cancer, and subsequent genetic testing says, oh, you've got the BRCA gene. Or you might have a colonoscopy and someone says, oh, you've got hereditary colon. So sometimes, even though we think that genetic problems are picked up in childhood, most of them are, some of them just aren't picked up later. So what if you have a child in your classroom who comes in, they have a diagnosed genetic disorder. Someone has said, yeah, this child has Noonan syndrome or Angelman or whatever. We have resources available for schools that specifically address many of these genetic conditions. Not all of them, because there are way too many. But if you have a child, Karen will tell you in just a minute about how to access the resources that NERGN has put together. If there's someone in your classroom who you think might have a genetic disorder, you know that, boy, this kid's behaving like his brother did, his older brother did when he came through my classroom, or I know he's got cousins got kind of similar appearance. It's just not quite right. If you suspect a genetic disorder, then the question is, would the involvement of a genetics professional be appropriate? And appropriate in a couple of different contexts, because certainly you don't want to be pushing everyone to genetics professionals, genetic specialists. It's expensive. The waiting lists are already horrendous. There's 6, 8, 9, 10 months, a year sometimes. And the other question is, do you, as a school, someone in the school system, have the authority or maybe the responsibility to bring to the attention of the parent, the school nurse, the physician who kind of keeps an eye on things in the school district? Do you have the ability to bring information to one of these folks and say, hey, did you ever consider that this child may have something like a genetic disorder, maybe XYZ? You're not going to make a diagnosis. We don't want you doing that. We don't want you overstepping your bounds. But if you have the ability, if you have a good relationship with the parents, you can bring this information to someone who might be able to look into it appropriately. So we asked a lot of parents, what do you think we ought to be looking for? People ought to be looking for. Certainly, if you have family history, if you've got affected relatives in many generations, that's a tip. Developmental delay, that's a tip. If there's unusual physical features, if these have no muscle tone, they have very little strength, that's a tip. If they really don't grow, they just eat, they don't eat, but they can't thrive. That's a tip. This could be a genetic disorder. What's the next one? Behavioral issues. So you see a lot of these could have nothing to do with the genetics, but it could be, what's going on at home. But if you have a lot of these going on in one kid, it increases the likelihood that there's a genetic condition here. The next slide, I think, yeah, Karen, you can just put all of these up, because we got involved with early intervention because we realized that our goals for NERGN and the early intervention goals that were prescribed by Congress in 1986 are pretty much the same. To enhance the development of infants and toddlers with disabilities, to minimize the need for special education, to maximize independent living, and to help the families manage and deal with their child's needs. We want this. The early intervention folks want this. Everybody wants this. So everybody's on the same page with this. It's just a matter of pooling our resources and getting it done. So that brings us to Karen Volle, who will discuss what we think is a very remarkable and useful resource, genetic education materials for school success. Take it, Karen.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you so much. And I'm really thrilled to be here. I love the Federation, your programming and your people. And I appreciate everybody's time for sticking with us. So GEMS, that's kind of our pet name, I guess, for the genetic education materials, was developed about 10 or 12 years ago when we started having, trying to find out from clinics, genetics clinics, what were some of the big questions. And most of these people were fielding questions from schools. So we realized that might be an area that there isn't a lot of information out there. We wanted to create something that would be really positive and inclusive for kids. The idea being that everybody deserves to have a great time at school. So we developed a website that I'll take you to shortly, knowing that if you can, again, teach people about some of these conditions, that takes away fear of the teachers, or it also helps, we found that it helps family members share a little bit about their child's condition with their family, who it's hard to kind of grasp and understand. So we've created a website that is quite simple to use and understand. Happily, it's free. It's very, very well vetted. And in fact, we have so much confidence in this resource for you in GEMS, and we want you to have confidence as you share it with either your family or your teachers, because it was all of the information was developed initially by a genetic counselor. And then it went through our occupational therapist, who was an inclusion specialist, also a parent of a child with a genetic condition. Then it went back and forth to our team. We ran all the information through different foundations for every condition. So we really had a lot of iterations to come up with good information. It's up to date, and we are currently updating it this year again. And as I mentioned, it shows that school can be a positive experience where you can expect to have high expectations for kids. There's different ways you could approach using this tool. There are 37 conditions that we feature. All of these conditions we chose because they actually have implications for school. So you might, if you don't find that condition, you might look for something that is similar. We think of this as really just a great way to get ideas to start. It's not a guideline. It's not diagnostic. It's just some really good ideas from parents who have been there. You would also, there's a feature that I think is kind of one of my favorite features myself. called the Meet a Child story. So that is, I'll show you those as well. Now, let me stop sharing. And I'm going to then share my website. If you've been to the website before, thank you. If you haven't, I hope you come and visit us again. So I'm starting at the NERGN website. We'll make sure you have access to all the websites for start here. I like to navigate from the home page. And you'll see there are a couple ways to get to GEMS. Oh, there it is. But I'm going to go here and click on that. And we'll come down and you'll see a lot of green buttons. These are all different syndromes that we are featuring. And I think I'm going to go ahead and choose Angelman syndrome. You can see it's a nice picture of someone with who experiences Angelman syndrome. These first pages is kind of the at a glance type of content where you can get just a small synopsis of what the condition is like. We didn't want to wallop people with genetics in any way. So the way this is structured is that you can read a little, and if you want more information, you can click on a link to go deeper. Because it's there's always a lot of clinical information. Every page has a link to more characteristics and symptoms. But it'd be fine if you never decided to go here, because you can learn something just from the first at a glance page. And over here we have different green buttons. These are all areas to think about in school. I'll make that a little bit bigger actually. So medical dietary needs, education supports, behavior sensory, field trips, school absence, emergency planning, and resources. So let me go, maybe I'll just go to behavior and sensory. All of these pages are set up. We thought, how would we approach this if I was a very busy school teacher? I think I would just want to know, tell me what I need to know and what can I do? So we set it up that way on every section, what you need to know, what you can do. And they are kind of short, bulleted, short sentences that are not too complicated, just about the very different areas you could go. It's really great to see kind of how this is fleshed out. Ideally, again, it's not too much information. We have our story I was mentioning earlier. So in this case, it's Meet Allie. And it's not about her condition first, it's about her personality. What does she like? What does she like to do at home? How has she found school? These are all very beautifully done interviews that we feel like that you would be happy to share this with a grandparent to get information. And they're good strategies at the end for parents and for schools. So if you did nothing but read these Meet a Child stories, I think that you could get quite a lot out of the website. And for new parents, I think knowing that there's something that is positive, it's inclusive, it's well vetted, I think that would be really nice to have to check out. And even seeing even if it's conditions that are just somewhat a little bit like what you might be experiencing, you could get quite a bit of benefit from reading those stories. We also have a PDF that you can print out with all the information. And originally we were thinking this might, well, parents asked for it actually, something they could take to an IEP meeting, or they can print out certain parts of it, whatever is useful. And we also have that in Spanish, which we're thrilled about. And we also have one more kind of a supplement. This is a page for school nurses and primary care, healthcare providers. about the syndrome. It's some of the same information, but enhanced. It has the characteristics of symptoms I showed earlier, but it also has what kind of routine surveillance will you need? What are the other specialists who might be involved? Things that are just, we actually worked with pediatricians one year who said this would be, they just don't see these kids all the time. So this would actually be really helpful for them. There's a sample letter of medical necessity you could write. So that's just there to know about. It may or may not be something that you as a parent might find helpful. We also have a lot of content on transitions in just kind of general, both education transitions and healthcare transitions. So this was developed quite a long time, and we're looking at it again to make sure that there isn't anything that isn't out of date, any of the links, but it's all wonderful, wonderful information that we've gleaned from some of our partners. So I think that leaves us a couple minutes. I wonder if there were any questions or if anyone would like to go to a different condition or has any questions.
And we haven't seen any general questions that have come through yet. I, as someone who was a previous special education advocate, I wish I had known about this resource. This is amazing. Right? You know, I mean, it's such a wonderful way to get really quick information about a condition that you don't see every day, but you may be supporting a family. And so I'm thrilled to see this as something that people can use. And I love the user friendliness and the simple language and just the ability to kind of get as much information as you want. It can be a high level or you can take the deep dive, which is so well organized. So thank you for that.
Well, that is wonderful. That's really validating for me to hear. And you reminded me, actually, we do have some content for undiagnosed kiddos. And again, as you all know, this may be someone who's not diagnosed yet, or it may be someone who's never diagnosed. That is often, that's often the situation for some families. And I think knowing that as a teacher, well, really the first time I learned about that myself, it just made me appreciate it in a different way because you just think about the stress maybe that a family is under. The journey to find a diagnosis, I learned some time ago, is called the Diagnostic Odyssey. The first time I heard that, I was really just floored because that says so much about just the journey and how long it can be. It can be a long journey. And the truth is, we're going to be dealing with these children on their journey, some of whom end up in genetics, some of whom do not. But even if they don't, you can get a lot of ideas anyway for just dealing with regular various issues. This page has some nice, I forgot about this page, but we have a page that has to do with the IEP 504 process. Now, don't worry about this chart. This was the original brainchild of the woman, Anne Dillon, who helped develop GEMS for us. She thought about a child in the middle and what are all the things that are scary to teachers, and then strategies around the outside. But all of that content is here as well. So there's two different ways to kind of see it, but basically it's a starting place for accommodations and with younger children and older children. It's a starting point though. I think it's a good one.
Oh, and as we all know, once you've met one child, you've met one child. So that's really a starting point is the best place to go.
Yeah, that's right. That is really true. That is really true.
All right. Well, you know, in the absence of other questions, and I just want to thank both of you, Karen and Ed, for an incredibly informative discussion. I've learned so much this evening and also have just gotten so many more clues on how to help families to be able to engage with their medical professionals and their school professionals, and when they even suspect something or have ways to look for that, for clues that there might be something else going on. So we really appreciate you bringing this information to us. And folks, we really appreciate all of you joining us this evening. There are a number of events coming up that the Federation is sponsoring. This coming weekend is a Planning a Life workshop, or I guess weekend conference. That's the word I'm looking for. So you might want to check into that as well if you are thinking of, if you have a loved one who is getting ready for transition age. It's a wonderful time to start looking at all of the different resources and knowing what questions to ask to prepare for the good life that your loved one would want to have. And I can tell you, as someone who's been a parent of a medically complex child, it's never too late, or I'm sorry, never too early to participate in transition planning. So be sure to take advantage of that. Also, the Federation is incredibly excited to be launching the Caregiver to Caregiver Respite Network, which is an opportunity for parents to support each other in providing and receiving respite services for their children. But we want to hear from you and understand what would make that most effective. So we have focus groups in 6, count them, 6 different languages: English, Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian Creole, Korean, and Chinese. So please be sure to come to our website so you can see when those are taking place over the next couple of weeks and sign up. We really do want your feedback and partner with you in making this as successful as possible and useful for you. And then also coming up in December, which, believe it or not, is not that far away, is our Making a Difference conference for our special education surrogate parents. So all of that information you'll find on our website. Be sure to check that there for all of that, as well as the video and the PowerPoint that was presented this evening that will be uploaded for future reference. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We will look forward to seeing you again in a future Connecting Families. And until then, be well and be safe. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, everybody, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you immensely.